title of the Biennale Arte 2024, Foreigners Everywhere, Stranieri Ovunque, comes from a series of works, neon sculptures, that the art collective Clairefontaine have been doing since 2005. There are about 60 different neon sculptures, and one reads in some 60 languages in different colors the expression Stranieri Ovunque, or foreigners everywhere. The expression in turn was appropriated in Italian, Stranieri Ovunque, was appropriated from the name of a political activist collective that in the beginning of the 2000s in Torino was fighting racism and xenophobia in Italy. From the notion of the foreigner, I unfold into the notion of the queer, because foreigner in Portuguese, Italian, French, and Spanish has proximity to strange, estrangeiro and estranho in Portuguese, and that's how we get to the queer. So there's quite a important focus on queer artists and trans artists in the exhibition. The third subject of interest is the outsider artist, which is linked to the self-taught artist and to the artista popular, the artist that's operating outside traditional circuits of arts, modern and contemporary art and academia. And in the fourth subject of interest in the exhibition is the indigenous artist, because the indigenous artist is often treated in his or her own land. These are the four subjects of interest of the Núcleo Contemporâneo, but there's also a Núcleo Histórico, which focuses on modernisms in the Global South. In terms of foreigners, I would mention two important artists that in fact won the Golden Lion for Lifetime Achievement, Ana Maria Maiolino, an Italian woman born in Calabria that migrated to Venezuela and now lives in Brazil. And then the second one is New Yalter, who did the opposite. Maiolino came from Europe, went to the Global South, and New Yalter came from the Global South and went to Europe. So she is a Turkish artist, born in Cairo, and has been living in Paris since the 1960s. In terms of indigenous artists, I would mention two collectives, MACU, the Movimento dos Artistas Runicuim, a collective of Runicuim artists from the western part of the Brazilian Amazon, who have painted the facade of the Central Pavilion. It's a wonderful, very large-scale work that greets the visitor there in one of the venues of the Biennale Arte 2024. And also the work by another collective, a Maori collective from New Zealand, Mataho, which is presented in the first very iconic large-scale room here in the Corderie of the Arsenale. In terms of self-taught artists, because I have a general focus in the Global South, I decided to look at outsider artists from Europe. So there are three of the most iconic women outsider artists are presented here in the exhibition. Aloise, a Swiss woman, and Madge Gill, a British woman. They're both presented in the Central Pavilion. And Anna Zemankova is presented here in the Corderie of the Arsenale. In terms of queer artists, there are many in this exhibition. I would mention Chola Poblete, who is also an indigenous artist from Argentina. I could mention Ryndon Johnson, who is also a foreigner. He is from the US and living in Berlin, and he has a wonderful sort of outdoor sculpture in the Giardini, because we also have a focus on works that are presented in the outdoor areas here of the Biennale. The work of Inca Shonibari is presented in fact, the very first room of the Corderie is usually where just the wall text is, right? So he's a very interesting artist, also a Afro-diasporic artist, Nigerian/British artist as well. I thought it worked very well as an introduction. It's almost as if he's entering the exhibition. And we also were very interested in the migrants related to ecological disasters, which is something that doesn't really appear so much in the exhibition. And I thought that was a very iconic work, the climate migrant, to be sort of presented under the neon foreigners everywhere. There's a lot of personal references and a lot of choices and decisions and criteria that reflect my professional and experience and my life experience. I'm, of course, a gay man, and I'm also have been a traveler and have lived abroad carrying a third world passport. I have lived as a young man in the US and as a child in the UK. And I'm coming from a country where the presence of artistas populares, the self-taught folk artists, play a very important presence and have been increasingly recognized by the institutions and the art system, and also a very strong presence of indigenous art and culture, both in Brazil and Latin America, although they have often been marginalized, but now again also being recognized more and more. We have indigenous curators and artists representing Brazil for the first time in the pavilion here in the Biennale. I feel that the title of the show has a political dimension as well as a poetic dimension, and dealing with the subject of the indigenous, the queer subject, the subject of the foreigner in particular. These three subjects are very much related to urgent issues, that are part of the debate, right, of the contemporary debate. So I think that does reflect in some ways. Also, the situation here in Europe, in the Mediterranean, right across from North Africa, for example. So I think the framework itself does reflect that. And many artists also with their work, I feel, also reflect that somehow. I am always looking for complexities, for singularity in the works, regardless of them being, made by indigenous artists or white artists or non-white artists or queer artists, right? I have always the same criteria. It's difficult to speak beyond complexity and singularity because you're often looking for something that is new, that surprises you, that you have not seen before. Therefore, it's very difficult to name it as like a specific criteria. Bringing the global south certainly to the Biennale. I'm the second curator from the global south in this long history since the late 19th century. And the first one actually living and based in the global south. The second one after Okoye-Mwezer, the famous, wonderful late curator who organized the 2015 exhibition. I wanted to bring that focus, and it's interesting to see that still the majority of the audience here in Venice, at the heart of Europe, is still European and North American. Of course, I'm coming from Brazil, that informs my view, but we have many different curators and many different artists. Another curator could come and do a completely different exhibition. It's not one single view, as it's not one single view from Europe, right? So this diversity exists there as well. Brazil is a very large country, for example. My city where I live, São Paulo, is a very large city as well. And, it's quite diverse and plural. And I mean, of course, I tried to bring many artists from that part of the world, from Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. But I'm not representing that as the view from that continent or that country or even that city. Many people have said that they don't know many of the artists in the exhibition. I have even heard that the exhibition doesn't seem very international because I have not included many of these perhaps more well-known European and North American names. There are artists from that part of the world, but usually they're from the global south living in these cities. So I am, of course, as the first curator here in this trajectory, I am trying to open that gate, right? So I have many more countries than often are represented in the international exhibition. But I'm just one curator that this year has the privilege and the mission and the responsibility to do that. I really do regard the Biennale, I did think about it very strategically because it may offer this extraordinary possibility of visibility and transformation. It can be a turning point in an artist's career or even the perception of the work of an artist that's no longer alive. I hope that happens to many. And it's not just me. I can introduce, I can provoke, but I need other colleagues, curators, journalists, art historians, critics, collectors, even dealers, to pick up on some of the things that I'm presenting here, and hopefully other stories and other narratives and other trajectories will depart from this. I hope this exhibition may be very transformative for many artists that are presented here, but we will only really see this in the next few years, right? Perhaps next few months or next few years, right?